They say the wind in Chicago during November doesn't just chill your skin, it cuts straight to the bone. On the eve of Thanksgiving, amidst the glowing lights of Millennium Park, thousands of people were rushing home to their warm dinners and families. They all walked past the same thing. An elderly woman, sitting on a frozen bench, weeping, with no shoes on her feet. 300 people passed her by. 300 people looked away. They saw a problem. They saw madness. They saw someone else's responsibility. But then, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus stopped. He didn't have money. He didn't have power. All he had was a worn-out hoodie, $2 in his pocket, and a heart that refused to look away. He didn't know that taking this stranger's hand would do more than just warm her fingers. He didn't know it would expose a $50 million conspiracy, bring down a corrupt empire, and prove that sometimes the smallest person can change the world. This is the story of how kindness became the most powerful weapon of all. At 4:45 p.m., the wind off Lake Michigan, locals call it the Hawk, because of the way it hunts you down, was cutting through the thickest layers of clothing. On Michigan Avenue, the sidewalks were a blur of expensive wool coats and shopping bags filled with tomorrow's Thanksgiving turkeys. 300 people rushed past the bus stop in a single hour. They looked at their phones. They looked at the traffic lights. They looked at the holiday decorations twinkling overhead. The only thing they didn't look at was the elderly woman sitting on the metal bench, weeping silently with her bare feet resting directly on the freezing concrete. Marcus King, 12 years old and shivering in a gray hoodie that had seen better days, was running. He had exactly 3 minutes to catch the number 4 bus back to the south side or be stranded in the downtown freeze. His hand was clenched tight inside his pocket, fingers brushing against 2 crumpled dollar bills, his entire savings, meant for a used comic book he'd been eyeing for weeks. But as he skidded to a halt near the shelter, the flash of bare skin caught his eye. It was impossible to miss, yet everyone was missing it. The woman looked like a broken porcelain doll, her silk blouse torn and stained with mud, her silver hair matted. She wasn't asking for money. She was just shaking, violently, her toes turning a terrifying shade of blue against the dusting of snow. The number 4 bus roared around the corner, its air brakes hissing a promise of warmth. This was it. Marcus stepped toward the curb. His mother's voice played in his head, sharp and exhausted. "Keep your head down, Marcus. Don't borrow trouble. We can't afford trouble." He looked at the bus doors hissing open. Then he looked back at the bench. A different voice rose up, softer, smelling of peppermint and old books, his grandmother. "Baby, if you see someone hurting and you walk away, you lose a piece of your soul that you can't buy back." The bus driver frowned, waiting. "You getting on, kid?" Marcus looked at the warm yellow light inside the bus. He looked at the $2 in his pocket. Then he looked at the woman's feet. "No," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. The doors slammed shut. The bus pulled away, taking the heat with it. Marcus was alone on the curb now. He didn't run. He walked slowly toward the bench, terrified but moving. He pulled his only pair of cheap knit gloves off his hands. He knelt down on the wet pavement, right in the slush, placing himself between the wind and the stranger. He reached out, his dark hands contrasting against her pale, frozen skin, and gently slid the gloves over her trembling fingers. "Ma'am, your hands are cold," he said softly. The woman lifted her head, eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the weather. She gripped his hand with desperate strength and whispered, "Please don't let him find me." Nothing triggers suspicion quite like the sight of a 12-year-old black boy in a soaking wet hoodie guiding a barefoot, silver-haired white woman through the aisle of a crowded city bus. As Marcus helped Mrs. Evelyn up the steps, using his body to shield her from the jostling crowd, the air inside the vehicle seemed to stiffen. Every pair of eyes bored into him, some with curiosity, most with a sharp, unspoken accusation. Marcus kept his head down, guiding Evelyn to a seat near the heater. He could feel the 2 crumpled dollar bills, his comic book money gone from his pocket, dropped into the fare box to pay for a stranger who was currently shivering against his shoulder. A heavy-set man in a thick bear's jacket leaned over from the seat behind them. He didn't look at Evelyn. His suspicious gaze was fixed entirely on Marcus. "She okay, son?" he asked, the word son sounding more like a warning than a term of endearment. "You bothering this lady?" Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, his heart hammering against his ribs, but before he could speak, Evelyn's trembling hand shot out. She gripped Marcus's arm with surprising ferocity. "He is helping me," she said, her voice cracking but firm. "He is the only one helping me." The man blinked, muttered something under his breath, and turned back to his window. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. By the time they reached the south side, the snow had turned into a slushy mix of gray ice. The walk to his apartment building was a gauntlet of freezing wind. When Marcus finally unlocked the peeling green door of apartment 4B, the smell of pinto bean soup and warm cornbread hit them like a physical embrace. Sarah King, still in her nursing scrubs from the day shift, looked up from the stove. She checked her watch, ready to scold Marcus for being late, but the words died in her throat. She stared at the disheveled, high society woman shivering in her entryway, and then at her son. Her face went pale. She rushed to the window and yanked the curtains shut, her movements frantic. "Marcus, have you lost your mind?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a very specific kind of fear that every mother in their neighborhood knew, the fear of being in the wrong place with the wrong person. "Police will think we kidnapped her. Do you know what happens to people like us when we're found with people like her?" At the word police, Evelyn let out a sharp cry, curling into herself on the worn linoleum floor. "No police," she begged, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing ghosts. "Please, no police. My son, he bought them. He owns them." Sarah paused, her nurse's instinct warring with her survival instinct. She looked at the woman's blue-tinged feet and let out a defeated sigh. "Get the basin," she told Marcus. "And the warm water." Sarah knelt before the stranger, rolling up the tattered silk trousers to soak Evelyn's frozen feet. As she gently washed away the street grime with a warm washcloth, her fingers brushed against something hard on the woman's finger, a tan line where a massive ring used to be. Then, she pushed the sleeve of the silk blouse up and gasped. Dark, ugly bruises dotted the inside of Evelyn's arm, the unmistakable tracks of forced injections. This wasn't a homeless woman. This was a prisoner who had escaped. Just then, the volume on the small TV in the corner spiked with the breaking news intro. Sarah looked up. On the screen, a photo of the woman sitting in her kitchen was displayed next to a headline: "Tech billionaire Julian Vance offers $10,000 reward for missing mother." The reporter's voice was urgent. Sarah dropped the washcloth, water splashing onto the floor. "Oh dear God," she whispered, staring at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes. "We aren't just helping a stranger. We are harboring Julian Vance's mother. $10,000. The number flashed across the bottom of the television screen in bright red letters, mocking every unpaid bill stacked on the kitchen counter. For a single mother working double shifts just to keep the heat on, that kind of money wasn't just a reward. It was a lifeline. It was rent for a year. It was a new winter coat for Marcus without holes in the elbows. Sarah stared at the screen, her hand gripping the edge of the laminate table, so hard her knuckles turned white. But then she looked across the small kitchen. Evelyn was holding a mug of bean soup with both hands, the steam rising to meet a face that was no longer confused, but etched with a terrifying clarity. The woman wasn't missing or lost, as the news anchor claimed. She was hiding. "He doesn't want me back because he loves me," Evelyn said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by the warmth of the food and the first moment of safety she'd felt in months. "He wants me back because I am the only thing standing between him and the company my husband built." She looked directly at Sarah. "Julian claims I have dementia. It's a lie. He paid Dr. Miller to falsify the records so he could take power of attorney. He drugged me to keep me quiet, and he locked me in Golden Horizon so no one would listen to the crazy old woman." Evelyn took a shaky breath. "If I go back, I won't just disappear, Sarah. I will die there." Sarah sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. The reality of the situation was settling in like a heavy stone. "Mrs. Evelyn, we believe you. But we are nobodies. Julian Vance is, he's Chicago royalty. Even if we go to the police, his lawyers will crush us before we even open our mouths. We need proof. Real proof." "I have it," Evelyn whispered. "A black ledger. I kept a record of every illegal withdrawal, every bribe he paid to the doctors, every asset he liquidated, and a USB drive with his voicemails threatening me. Her eyes lit up with a desperate hope. I hid them in a wall safe behind the painting of the Golden Autumn, in my room 305, before they dragged me to the isolation wing. He doesn't know it's there. Sarah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Golden Horizon? That place is a fortress. They have cameras, guards, keycards. We can't just walk in there. The room fell silent, save for the howling wind rattling the window pane. It seemed impossible. The evidence that could save them was less than 5 miles away, yet it might as well have been on the moon. Marcus, who had been quietly dipping a piece of cornbread into his soup, suddenly stopped chewing. He looked at his school backpack by the door, where a permission slip was crumpled in the side pocket. "We don't have to break in," he said, his voice steady. Sarah and Evelyn turned to him. "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving," Marcus continued. "The Lincoln School Choir is singing for the residents' lunch. We have a pass. We're going right into the main hall." He looked at his mother. "I know where the elevators are. I can get to the 3rd floor while everyone is eating." "No," Sarah said immediately. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "But if we don't, he wins," Marcus countered, sounding older than his 12 years. "And she dies." Sarah looked at her son, then at the terrified woman who had been nothing but a headline an hour ago. She saw the same resolve in Marcus's eyes that his grandmother used to have. She closed her eyes and nodded, defeated by the truth. Evelyn reached across the table and took Marcus's small hand in hers. "The safe needs a code," she whispered, tears welling up again. "It's December 4th, 89. She paused, a tragic smile touching her lips. "December 4th, 1989. The day Julian was born. I used the happiest day of my life as the combination to protect myself from him." Marcus squeezed her hand, memorizing the numbers. "December 4th, 89, he repeated. "I'll bring it back, Mrs. Evelyn. I promise." The angelic harmony of Amazing Grace rose from the 20 students of the Lincoln School Choir, filling the grand lobby of Golden Horizon Estate with a sense of peace that was entirely deceptive. To the staff and the few bored residents gathered for the Thanksgiving performance, it was a heartwarming scene. But inside the deep pockets of his oversized burgundy choir robe, Marcus King's hands were sweating profusely. He wasn't singing, he was counting the seconds. As the song reached its crescendo and the audience broke into polite applause, Marcus turned to the choir director, feigning a grimace. "Mrs. Gable, bathroom," he whispered urgently. She nodded, distracted, waving him toward the hallway. This was his chance. Marcus slipped away from the group, but instead of heading to the restrooms on the ground floor, he darted toward the emergency stairwell. His mother had warned him, elevators have cameras. Stairs are for staff. They're usually clear. He pushed the heavy door open and sprinted up 2 flights, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the linoleum. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, sounding loud in the quiet concrete shaft. 3rd floor. The VIP wing. He cracked the door open. The hallway was silent, lined with expensive artwork and smelling of lavender, masking the faint scent of bleach. Room 305 was at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked. Why lock an empty room? Marcus slipped inside. The room was stripped bare of personal effects, cold and impersonal. On the far wall hung the painting Evelyn had described, a generic landscape titled Golden Autumn. Marcus lifted the heavy frame with trembling fingers. There it was, a small, digital wall safe. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his hand. 1-2-0-4-8-9. The keypad beeped softly with each press. A small green light flashed. Click. The door swung open. Inside lay a black leather notebook and a silver USB drive. Marcus grabbed them, his heart leaping with victory, and shoved them deep into the inner pocket of his robe. Just as he pushed the painting back into place, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. They were coming fast. Marcus froze. A man's voice, arrogant and loud, boomed right outside the door. "I want this room scrubbed, Director. If my mother left so much as a hairpin behind, I want to know." It was Julian Vance. Marcus looked around frantically. There was no way out. The window was locked. The bathroom was too obvious. He dove into the narrow wardrobe closet near the entrance, pulling the slatted door shut just as the main door to room 305 swung open. Through the wooden slats, Marcus could see the polished tips of expensive Italian leather shoes stepping into the room. Julian paced around, his presence filling the small space with a suffocating tension. "She's not just missing," Julian growled into his cell phone. "She's plotting. I can feel it." He stopped pacing. He was standing less than 3 feet from the closet. Marcus pressed his hands over his mouth to stifle the sound of his own terror, tears stinging his eyes. Suddenly, Julian stopped. He bent down. On the floor, right in front of the closet door, lay a small, crumpled gum wrapper that had fallen out of Marcus's pocket when he dove in. Julian reached for it, his eyes narrowing as he looked closer at the floor. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the door to be ripped open. But the sharp, jarring ring of a cell phone shattered the silence, freezing Julian's hand in midair. Julian Vance's scream of pure, unadulterated rage when he found the wall safe empty back at the nursing home was loud enough to frighten the staff, but the real horror was waiting for him across town, inside a peeling apartment building on the south side. At 1 p.m., the scent of roasted turkey, a gift from a neighbor, was finally filling Sarah King's small kitchen, but no one had an appetite. Marcus had just burst through the door, chest heaving, sweat soaking his choir robe. He didn't speak. He simply pulled the black ledger and the silver USB drive from his pocket and pressed them into Evelyn's hands. Her fingers closed around them like a lifeline. "You did it," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You actually did it." Before they could even embrace, a thunderous pounding shook the front door. "Police. Open up." The door flew open before Sarah could even reach the lock. Julian Vance stormed in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and the county sheriff. He looked manic, his expensive suit disheveled, his eyes wild. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. "That's her. That's the woman who kidnapped my mother." He sneered, looking around the modest apartment with undisguised disgust. "Look at this filth. She clearly dragged my mother here to extort me. Arrest her immediately." The sheriff stepped forward, reaching for his handcuffs. Sarah backed away, her hands raised in surrender, terror draining the blood from her face. "No, please, I didn't," she stammered. Marcus threw himself between the sheriff and his mother, spreading his arms wide. "Don't touch her," he shouted, his voice cracking but fierce. "She didn't do anything. Mrs. Evelyn wants to be here." Julian let out a cruel, barking laugh. "The word of a confused old woman and a street kid against mine," he spat. "I am Julian Vance. I own half this city. Who do you think a judge is going to believe?" "I suspect he'll believe the Federal Bureau of Investigation." A calm baritone voice cut through the tension. Henry Higgins, wearing a trench coat that had seen better decades, stepped out from the hallway shadows where he had been waiting. He held up a laptop, the silver USB drive already plugged into the side. "We've been listening to the recordings on this drive for the last 20 minutes, Sheriff. It's quite a playlist." Julian admitting to bribing Dr. Miller. Julian discussing the illegal sale of his mother's estate. Julian laughing about how easy it was to declare a sane woman incompetent. The room went dead silent. Julian's face turned a shade of gray that matched the winter sky outside. He stammered, backing up. That's illegal wiretapping. You can't use that." Higgins smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "Mrs. Vance recorded these conversations herself. It's not wiretapping, it's evidence." The sheriff paused, looking from the panicked billionaire to the resolute elderly woman standing tall in the center of the room. Slowly, he unhooked the handcuffs from his belt, walked past Sarah, and snapped them onto Julian's wrists. The metallic click echoed like a gunshot. "Julian Vance," the sheriff said, "you have the right to remain silent." As they dragged him toward the door, Julian thrashed, looking back at his mother with desperate eyes. "Mom, you can't let them do this. I'm your son." Evelyn tightened her grip on Marcus's hand, her voice icy and final. "You stopped being my son the day you left me in the cold." This stranger, she looked down at the boy, was the only one who stopped. Outside the frosted windows of the Southside apartment, the Chicago winter had deepened, burying the city under 6 inches of fresh snow. But inside apartment 4B, for the first time in years, there was no chill in the air. The small electric heater hummed in the corner, but the real warmth came from the center of the room, where a golden brown turkey delivered from the finest restaurant in the city sat proudly on the wobbly laminate table. It was a Thanksgiving dinner that looked like a magazine cover, surrounded by a mismatched family that looked like a miracle. Evelyn Vance sat at the head of the table, wearing a simple wool sweater Sarah had lent her, looking more regal than she ever had in her silk gowns. She tapped her glass with a fork, silencing the laughter between Sarah and Henry Higgins. "I have an announcement," Evelyn said, her voice steady and clear. "My lawyers have frozen Julian's access to my accounts. He is facing 10 years in federal prison for fraud and elder abuse." She turned to Sarah, reaching across the mashed potatoes to take her hand. "But justice is only half the battle. Security is the other half. Sarah, I know your landlord has been threatening eviction. He won't anymore. I bought the building this morning. You and your neighbors will never have to worry about a roof over your heads again." Sarah gasped, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned to Marcus, who was quietly pushing pumpkin pie around his plate, still overwhelmed by the day's events. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. She placed it gently next to his plate. "And for the young man who gave me his gloves when the world gave me the cold shoulder," she said softly. Marcus opened it. It wasn't cash. It was a legal document titled the Evelyn Marcus Scholarship Fund. "This guarantees your full tuition, books, and board for any university you choose, all the way through medical school," Evelyn whispered. "You saved my life with those cold hands, Marcus. Now let me use what I have to secure your future." Marcus stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and buried his face in Evelyn's shoulder. The room was filled with the kind of heavy, happy silence that only comes after a long struggle. Later that evening, as the adults cleared the table, Marcus walked to the window. He looked down at the street below. Under the glow of the streetlight, a homeless man was shuffling through the snow, wrapping a thin newspaper around his shivering arms. Marcus touched the brand-new thick wool scarf around his own neck, a gift from Evelyn. He didn't hesitate. He smiled, unspooled the scarf, and ran toward the door. The cycle of kindness hadn't ended. It had just begun. In a world that often teaches us to look away, a 12-year-old boy taught us that the bravest thing we can do is simply stop. True wealth is not measured by the brand of your coat or the balance in your bank account, but by the warmth of your hand extended to a stranger in need. So, the next time you see someone standing alone in the cold, remember Marcus. Be the one who stops, because kindness is the only investment that never fails to return.